Hello there. This is AD Robles, and you're listening to AD on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. All right, let's get started today. Let's jump right into it. Back by popular demand, we are going to start another response to a good faith debate from Gospel Coalition. I know I said I wouldn't do any more of these. I said that they've kind of, run their course and all of that kind of thing. And I fully intended that was my position. However, people just keep commenting that they love it. They love the content. So if you don't like this content, well, I apologize for that. But I'm a man of the people. You know what I mean? I do the videos for you, and I just got quite a few requests. So I don't know if we'll do like a full deep dive or anything like that, but we're definitely going to start talking about the latest good faith debate, which is, should Christians send their kids to public school? Which the answer is no. In any case, before we begin, I wanted to just show you this picture that I found on Reddit. I guess this was put out by the U.S. government, and it's a picture of the Chinese spy balloon that was allegedly flying over Montana, that was allegedly shot down, and allegedly, I guess there's maybe more of them. I don't really know what the allegations are, but really don't care. What I wanted to show you was this. Now, this is the spy balloon, and as you can see, it's a satellite. It's a satellite. This is exactly what the ISS looks like, maybe a little smaller, of course. This is exactly what every satellite that they claim is just floating around up there looks like, and it is attached to a gigantic balloon. That's how it floats, which makes a lot of sense because, that's typically how things that float do float. We attach balloons to them. Like if you're in a hot air balloon, you go in a basket and you don't just float. You are attached to a balloon, and so you're floating. And I think this is them telling us that all the satellites that we see up there, and I've seen them, like the floating in the night sky and stuff like that. Well, they're attached to balloons. That's what's going on here. That actually makes quite a bit of sense when you think about it. More sense than the idea that they're just floating up there, because that's what they claim. Now, they're attached to balloons, and this is a image that shows that these satellites, which I guess we're now calling spy balloons, are attached to balloons. But let's just jump into it. That's enough conspiracy for the day. Should Christians send their kids to public school? Good faith debate. This is a debate between John Pennington, who's I think he's at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's the guy that they wheeled out when they needed someone to defend that Dominic Dominguez guy who was saying that like the book of Genesis was a bunch of myths. They needed to defend him, so they got Jonathan Pennington out to say, "Oh, you're a beautiful brother, brown brother in Christ," and all of that kind of thing. So he's a company man, and of course that's what Gospel Coalition's all about, company men. And they have him debating against the grand matriarch of the Village Church, Jennifer Wilkin, who I've got opinions about, but I'm just gonna keep it brief here. I don't like her, and I don't like her teaching. And this is the thing. So we're gonna get into this. I haven't seen the whole video here. I have seen a snippet or two, so I'm not totally fresh going into this, But Jen Wilkin is the pro-public school side, which makes perfect sense because she's a prog. She's a liberal. She's a progressive. And then John Pennington is the, hey, they shouldn't go to public school kind of position, which also makes perfect sense because he's a company man. He's not going to actually take a hard line on this. He's actually not going to put forward the best arguments. He's going to put forward the company-approved arguments, the guild-approved arguments. And that's what these debates are all about. They're not really debates. They're all about pushing the church leftward and leftward and leftward and leftward. So let's jump into it. Let's see what the matriarch of Village Church has to say about public school. Very serious, dark lighting. Yeah, it's very good stuff.
Welcome to TGC's Good Faith Debate.
Interesting. Now, the debate started off very ominous. The very ominous, very serious sound. It was more like a tone. It wasn't really a song. It was just kind of like a boom, like a, like it reminds you of of a serious movie's like trailer, boom, like that. And it was very dark. And if you remember, we had criticized the previous good faith debate because it was very ominous lighting, very villainous lighting. Marcus Pittman said it was villain lighting. He showed us a few examples of the kind of lighting that they were going for. And it was just very awkward and weird. Like, why would you light your stage that way in a good faith debate? Well, it looks like they've responded. Gospel Coalition has responded, and they've given us a much more soft tone to their lighting. The stage is a lot more effeminate. It's a lot more inviting. Like, you wouldn't have any problem talking to someone here because this is not going to be a hard-hitting debate. There's nothing scary here. This is well lit. It's very soft. The tones are very soft. And it's very interesting. Now, so I guess good on Gospel Coalition. I mean, this is better than the villain lighting. Still not quite the right tone in my opinion, for a debate. But again, these aren't really debates. These are just all about, progressivizing the church. Interesting. I'm not an expert on body language or dressing and things like that. But if you notice, of course, the two men are dressed in a very Mr. Rogers kind of a way, very casual but academic at the same time. So this is the kind of thing that you'd expect a college professor to wear, which I think he is a college professor. So that makes perfect sense. I mean, he dresses for his part. And so is he. He's very, non-threatening. You're never going to feel threatened by a guy dressed like this, and that this is an intentional way that they've chosen to dress. People dress a certain way to tell a certain story. But just inexplicably, I cannot for the life of me understand what is going on here with this Sith Lord attire that Jen Wilkin is wearing. And all of the women who debated in these good faith debates, they all dressed like Sith Lords. Now, obviously, Karen Pryor, I don't want to call her Swallow Pryor because I don't want to give any credence to that nonsense of your maiden name. That's just ridiculous. Karen Pryor, of course, dressed the most like a Sith Lord and actually looks like a Sith Lord. Jen Wilkin doesn't really look like a Sith Lord, but she does kind of look like that dark side version of Rey from Star Wars. Like, she's obviously wearing these very ominous clothing. It's a contrast here. So you see the woman who's supposed to be delicate and soft because that's how God made women. She's dressed like a Sith Lord. And then, of course, you've got the men who are supposed to be iron sharpening iron, a little bit gruff, a little bit rough around the edges, maybe a little bloat maxing going on, that kind of thing. That's how men are supposed to look, but they end up looking soft. And it's like, I'm not trying to criticize their style because this is appropriate for a college professor. I'm not saying they're dressing inappropriately, but you can see the contrast that is being set up. And I don't think for a second that any of this is unintentional. This is intentional. So we've got a very hardened woman on one side, and then we've got softened men. And again, I'm not criticizing college professors. We need college professors. But in a debate, this is sending you a message. And I just find this so weird. Why do the women always dress like Sith Lords? I think I know why. I think you know why. But let's move on and start this debate.
So these are a series of conversations designed to help you navigate difficult and maybe even polarizing issues in contemporary life and culture. My name's Jim Davis, pastor.
But they're not designed for that. They're designed to help you navigate it leftward. That's what they're designed to help you do. They're designed to help normalize, and we're going to talk about normalizing things in a second. They're designed to help normalize progressivism in the evangelical church. They're designed to make the church less conservative and more progressive. They're designed to subvert the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's what these debates are designed for. They're supposed to make you think that this is normal. We've got a hardened woman on this side, a softened man on this side. We come together, meeting of the minds, and we march leftwards. That's what this is designed to do. It's supposed to normalize that activity. And we will never, ever stand for that being normalized in the Church of Jesus Christ. We will not. You will be kicked out of the church before we stand for this kind of nonsense.
Orlando Grace Church, and it is a privilege to be able to be here and moderate these debates.
Look how much
the topic
he's so
at
matchy.
hand
Look at his little
today
shoes,
is the
match his little
education of
jacket.
our children. This is a very passionate and complex issue because this involves those that we love most in the world.
It's a very passionate
and it's complex
issue.
because
How much do you
there
want to
are many
bet
different
these
variables
people will not be
based
passionate
on
in any way?
conviction and context and finances and family dynamics. So I appreciate today that we get to have Jen Wilkin and Dr. Jonathan Pennington join us to talk about this very important issue. Jen Wilkin is a Bible teacher and author in Dallas, Texas, mother of 5. Dr. Pennington is a professor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a pastor and father of 6. Thank you so much, both of you.
Two things I noticed there. I liked how he went the Southern Baptist University or seminary or whatever he said. I like that. That was good. That was very good. I like that. But if you notice, what he did there, he introduced the people and he talked about their vocation and then how many children they have. Their vocation and how many children he had. And again, this is all about normalizing sort of like the strong woman who's coming in to be iron sharpening iron. She's got her big ideas and we're gonna hash this out. We're gonna chop it up and we're gonna debate this thing. And I'm dressed like a Sith Lord. You're dressed like a little pansy and we're gonna hash this out. And I've got a job too. I've got my career. And this is so interesting because this plays directly into this debate, right? Because the reality is so often we hear people, well, I don't have the money to private school and I have to work, so I can't homeschool either. And so often what we have is people saying, I can't do what I know I should do. I know that public school is not good and not ideal, but my situation, I can't do it. And I'm not going to say there's no situations like that, right? Of course, I think that there probably could be some situations where you literally cannot do anything but public school. I think that those situations are hardly ever true. And there's a few of them, but chances are you're not in that situation. What normally is the case, though, is that mom is not willing to give up her career. Mom's got a very big, important career. She's a Bible teacher. She's in ministry. She's a full-time minister. Whatever that's supposed to mean as a woman, she doesn't want to give up her career, and so the kids go to public school. They go learn a pagan ideology. Or maybe if she's not a career woman, maybe they don't want to give up a certain level of standard of living, right? We want to live in a certain neighborhood. We want to have a certain size house. We want to have a certain kind of car. We want to have certain kinds of clothes. We want to dress like Sith Lords in every day of the week, a different outfit, just like this one kind of thing. We want to have we are not willing to give that up. And so their kids are going to public school. It's not a matter of can't, it's a matter of not willing. And I believe that there's a quote coming in this debate where Jen Wilkin admits she didn't really seriously try to put private school or homeschool her kids. It really wasn't a serious consideration. And that's the case for most people. The fact is you could do it, you could figure it out, but you choose not to. It is not worth the effort to you. And that's a big problem. And the thing is, in the old days, maybe we can make an argument the schools aren't that bad, things like that. That's a different issue. We're in 2023. We know what happens at these schools. They're indoctrinated by an antichrist worldview in every class. It's not just social studies. It's not just health class. It's not just science. It's in every class. Math, everything. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, the gay stuff, the trans stuff. This is so antithetical to Christ's worldview. And the reality is, we're going to talk about this in a minute, it's not just the lessons. It's not just the stuff you see in the lessons plans. It's other stuff. And this is just a very naive position to put your kids in harm's way like that. In 2023, public schools are a battlefield and an indoctrination camp, and it's not appropriate for a Christian to send their children to a pagan and enemy indoctrination camp. It doesn't make any sense. It's putting a stumbling block in front of them. It's something you ought not to do. And so you ought rather to eat beans and rice every day if that's what it took to put your kids in private school or to homeschool. If that's what it took, you should be willing to do that, because eating beans and rice is a small price to pay to not have your child brainwashed by enemies. They're not just your enemies. They're enemies of Jesus. They're enemies of Jesus Christ.
You for joining us today.
So the fact is they're not willing to do it. It's not that they can't do it. It's that they can't do it while maintaining the things that they want to maintain, their career or their financial position. It's not that they can't do it. It's just that they're unwilling to make the sacrifices necessary. Look, when Jesus Christ says to count the cost, that's not just a coffee mug type of a verse where you put it in there and you feel good about yourself. You actually do have to count the cost. And sometimes the cost is, I don't get to wear the fancy pants. That's the Owen Benjamin thing. I don't get to wear the fancy pants the way I want to. You know what I mean? Maybe I only have one, nice change of clothes, and then I'm wearing some secondhand stuff. Or maybe it's all secondhand. Or maybe I have to live with my parents. Or maybe I have to do this or do that. I'm living in a worse neighborhood or whatever it is. Like this is the reality. You have to count the cost if you're going to have children. Don't send them to the enemy encampment. Don't send them to the enemy indoctrination center. Don't send them to a place where they're going to normalize every single part of an anti-Christian worldview every single day of their lives. It doesn't make sense. All right, sorry for the interruption. We're going to continue.
So Jen, we'll start with you. What is your perspective on this issue?
Well, my perspective is heavily autobiographical. Our kids did go to public school, and not only that, but my family is filled with public educators. My mother taught in the public school system at all levels, all of her career. My father served on the school board in our hometown. My siblings and I were all public school educated. I have a brother who is an assistant principal at a public high school. I have a brother who was in the inaugural class of Teach for America. He taught a year in Bedford-Stuy in New York City and a year in rural Arkansas, and ended up with a teaching career in rural Arkansas. My sister-in-law teaches at the middle school in my district right now. My mother-in-law is a retired teacher. My daughter is a chemistry teacher who's taught in the public schools. And I have a nephew who's going to be a history teacher. So we're all in on the public schools in our family. And you can imagine that as someone who was in full-time outward-facing ministry, that was met with a lot of raised eyebrows through the years, especially when you have
What is that supposed to mean? I'm in full-time outward-facing ministry. As a woman, what is that supposed to mean? Is she a pastor? Is she a deacon? What is she? She writes books. That's what she does. She basically is a pastor without the title. She writes books and things like that, and it's a full-time role for her. So quite frankly, we don't know the exact reasons for this exchange, what the motivations really are. We could guess at some of the motivations, but the exchange that she made was, I wanted to maintain my career. I'm a full-time outward-facing minister. That to me was more important than doing the right thing for my children. That's the exchange that was made. And she's going to justify it in all kinds of ways. Oh, the public schools aren't that bad. Oh, you got to love your neighbor. Oh, you got to, and all this kind of stuff. But none of it makes any sense when you actually open up the hood, maybe dig a little bit, an inch deep, ask a few key questions. And again, this is not 1986. You know what I mean? The schools were bad back when I went to school. In the 90s, the schools were bad. I remember distinctly hearing things that I know were against God's word. And they shaped me, man. But even more than the lessons. Again, this is about more than the lessons. Because I remember anti-Jesus lessons, right? I remember anti-Christ lessons, anti-Christian worldview lessons. But those were easy enough to identify, right? Like, I knew that I was taught something different at home. And look, my parents, were great parents. They did a great job. I went to public school. All my brother and sister went to public school. And we're all Christians now. So I know that it's not like a death sentence for your children. That's not what I'm saying. And I love my parents, and I'm grateful for the job they did on me. I'm not doing the same for my kids, and I don't think they made the right choice. But at the end of the day, everything turned out okay. I remember the lessons where they told me that God did not create the world in 6 days. I remember the lessons where they told me that God did not create with man in mind, right? He created, or he didn't even create. We're just like a meaningless universe, and somehow rocks turned into life, and life turned into humans. I remember learning all this stuff, and I remember conflict with my grandmother. Talking about some of the stuff I had learned. And my grandmother was a simple woman, and she said, nope, that's not what the Bible says. And I remember conflict, and so there were some seeds sown there. But at least the stuff that was lessons, I knew that it was different than what I had been taught, right? So there was an awareness there, right? But the stuff that's really dangerous is not the lesson plans necessarily. It's the stuff that's just assumed. The environmental stuff that changes how you act and how you view the world without you being overtly taught it. Like, for example, let me just use this as an example. Most of my teachers were females, right? They were mostly women. And so to a woman, the way you relate to one another, the way you debate with one another, the way you handle conflict, it's completely different and sometimes inappropriate for men. And so I talk to my brother about this all the time. Like, we were fish swimming in a water of feminism, and that's not, I'm not trying to exaggerate. Like, that's really what it was like. It's obviously it wasn't really a fish. That's not what I'm saying. But we had to navigate looking at the world like a woman looks at the world. And look, women look at the world like women, and that's great for women. But for young men growing up, That's not great. And there are things that we learn, and we didn't learn this in a lesson plan. We didn't learn it in an official kind of a way. It was just the air we breathed. I have to deprogram a lot of that stuff. And even now, I catch myself and I think, that's not really true. And the problem is that these guys here, these two men, either they never unlearned it or they're unwilling, because the Gospel Coalition reinforces effeminate actions, effeminate behaviors, effeminate interactions. That's why this whole good faith debate is effeminate. And the reality is like that's the real danger, right? Because the lessons, a lot of people fall for the lessons too, and they say, oh yeah, Jesus didn't create the world in 6 days. They fall for the Antichrist lessons. But for me, it wasn't like that. I knew the alarm bells went off. I knew it was different than what I had learned, right? But it's the stuff that's not part of the lessons. But we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Let's let her
larger
continue.
than average number of kids, people immediately assume that if you were a person of strong religious convictions with a large family, you are either homeschooling or doing private school.
There's a reason they assume that is because that's often the case, because that's often what works, and that's what Christians have seen. The schools got worse and worse and worse, and now they're training grounds for the LGBT cult. They're training grounds for the socialist cult. That's all they are now. And so people see that, and they're like, wait, you're sending your kids to the LGBT glisten cult? That's weird. Like, I know you're the matriarch of my church, but, that's a little strange. And it is strange. And that's a sign, Jen. That's a sign.
And we didn't. And we did choose public school out of conviction, but I always like to make clear up front that we did not have any special consideration.
You chose it out of convenience and your ultimate desires that outweighed your desire to do the right thing for your children, and then you justified it by pretending you had conviction. Because you cannot show me something in the scripture that says, you know what? Send your kids to the Philistines, because you got to love your neighbor. I mean, the Philistines are also made in the image of God. Send your kids to learn about the world, the universe, how it was created, how you should act to the Egyptians. Do it. Look, a lot of Israelites were trained in Egyptian schools, or not a lot, but some were, and they ended up okay. They ended up following the Lord, right? So, okay, I get it. I understand. That happens sometimes, but you're trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, I searched the scriptures, and I saw that it was actually a moral imperative. If I love Christ, I send my kids to the Philistines or the Egyptians to learn what they think about everything. I mean, they're on mission. I don't know if she says that, but that's a lot of people say. No, that's not what happened, Jen. What happened was you decided you wanted to be a full-time minister. I didn't have time to train my own kids, and I wanted to live a certain lifestyle that just did not. I had to send my kids to public school. And then you went and you tried to justify it in the scriptures. This is what all sin does. When a Christian sins, they do this exact thing. They have ultimate desires that outweigh their desire to serve Christ, and then they search the scriptures to try to figure out how they can justify it. That's what you did, Jen.
In that.
These guys aren't going to tell you that. These guys aren't going to tell you that because they're focused on another priority, and that's to appear winsome, to appear reasonable, to appear lovely, and to appear softened. They don't want to appear like a hardened guy. That's why they have the haircuts they have. That's why they're dressed the way they're dressed, and that's why you're dressed the way you're dressed. They're not going to tell you this because they don't care about you. They care about their careers. They're company men. But Jen, you ought to repent for this. This is something that ought not to have been. You did not have the conviction to do this.
Kids did not have learning disabilities. There were no special concerns that might have played into that decision for us, and I'm very sensitive to that. Not only that, we always lived near excellent schools. So I would never say everyone should choose public school, but I would say that we should try really hard to, if at all possible. Because we believe in the public school ideal. We believe that education is a right. It's necessary for human flourishing. It's good for society. It's a mark of civilization that you have an educated citizenry. And so if that is something that you can see, then you would value that you would have quality education for everyone.
You see, there's so much here that I don't have the time to unpack it all, but But a couple things happened there that were very, very sneaky. And I think that Jen Wilkin's pretty smart. So I'm not saying that she's not smart. I think she did this intentionally. One thing that she did was she said a lot of things that were true and a lot of things that were untrue all at once. And now you need to pull them apart. Education is not a right, number one. Education is not a right. Because education is something that you get from somebody else. Somebody teaches you. Somebody helps you. Somebody guides you. And so you don't have a right to that person's labor, obviously. Number two, she mixed up. If you notice, she did not say that all the good things about education, it's a mark of civilization, it's a good thing, it's a benefit, it's a sign of human flourishing. All that's great stuff. What does that have to do with public education? Did you notice she said they should have everyone needs to have the right to have access to the best education. And that's a sign of human flourishing. Well, maybe education is a sign of human flourishing. Maybe it's not. But what does that have to do with public education? What does the best education have to do with public education? What does the best kind of schooling have to do with what your kids get in public school in the United States? There's so many mishmash and things you need to pull apart here. And so she's saying some true things, but she's mixing it with false things. And then she's also just assuming that the best is public. The best is public. I can't wait for her to see how she defends this. Now, I have no faith whatsoever that these two men are going to have her defend this through the scripture. Because she said the public school is the ideal, convictionally, it's the ideal situation, is what she said. So I'm assuming, I guess she has to mean that the Bible puts out public education as the ideal. I'd love to see her defend that. Do I think that there's public education it's impossible for it to be moral? I don't think that. Not necessarily. But that's not what our situation is now. Like, we're not talking about a good situation, like an ideal moral education that we're getting in 2023 in the United States. We're talking about an evil antichrist education that you're getting in 2023. And no subject is apart from this. Every subject is poisoned by an antichrist ideology in the United States. It is just that simple.
All possible. And we believed that our participation in the public school system was directly related to loving our neighbors, and so if we could opt in at all, then we absolutely
There's
wanted
no way
to.
they're going to challenge her on that. They
so
should, though.
We did.
They need to.
We opted in, and I would say that one of the big things that helped us to be able to say yes to the public schools was that we believed that worldview came from your home. Your worldview and your values came from your home. And I think that that's what everyone believes in the education debate, but I don't know that the public school parent always gets credit for that perspective. We did not think that it was a simple matter of just sending them off to get educated and then everything would sort of fall into place. The church would pick up the slack on whatever they needed to get for their Christian worldview. Jeff and I are nerdy people who like to learn. And so our children's love of learning in all likelihood, or in fact, I hope, came from the ethos that was in our home. And we knew that that would be a factor in the way that they inhabited a public school space, that if they were in a classroom where that love of learning was not being particularly amplified, that we could pick up the slack at home. We definitely had lots of conversations about everything that they were learning and the social elements as well. But because the education, the quality of education piece was not a question for us, we knew they would get an excellent learning experience, and we welcomed the social aspect of it. The public schools were an easy yes for us in the space that we were in.
All right, well, in the space that I'm in, that makes absolutely no sense, and you are one of the most naive people that's ever been on a good faith debate. That's in the space that I'm in. You know, so this space over here, in reality, you are naive. She just said, "Oh yeah, you know, I know that there's some things over in that school that's not. We had lots of me and my husband. We love to learn. We love to learn, and we had lots of conversations about every lesson that they had." That's so naive. Number one, it's so naive, but it doesn't even matter. Let's just give it to her. Every lesson plan, they reviewed it. They knew it was going to be a thorough education. Let's just give it to her. Every single thing she said, they did. They had conversations about every social interaction. That is naive as well. That's naive on the level that I can't even imagine ever being duped as a parent to thinking that I knew about every social interaction my kid had? Because I know for a fact my parents were involved in my life. My parents were not absentees. They asked me about things, and I know how many secrets I kept from my parents. It was a lot. It was a lot. I kept a lot of secrets. I did, things like, okay, but let's just give it to her. Her children are perfect. They tell her everything. They've had conversations, lots of conversations. This is how people justify this, by the way. It's not convictional. This is just a standard justification. This is nothing new from Jen Wilkin. We had lots of conversations. Oh, yes. Here's the problem. The lessons are a problem, but that's not the biggest problem. The social interactions, I saw a kid being bullied, and that's the kind of thing you imagine. Oh, I saw a lesbian. Like that's the kind of stuff you imagine. And maybe they did have conversations about that, because that's the big stuff, right? Because I remember the big stuff that I encountered at school, I told my parents about, but then there were some other things that I didn't. But it's not even that stuff, right? I did keep secrets, but I'm not, maybe her kids weren't like me, right? They weren't. I'm not saying every kid's like me that had secrets from his parents. It's the stuff that they don't even know that they're learning. It is so naive. It is naive on a level I can't imagine any Christian being in 2023 to think that you know everything that you're being affected by from this worldview. Let me give you an example. I saw this thread from Jeff Wright about the movie Kanto, and it is such a good thread. I like the movie Kanto, and Jeff Wright here is saying he can't get past Luisa. This is one of the sisters who's it's a male character, but they made it a sister, and she's a strong woman, and she's physically a beast. She's lifting 4 donkeys here. Everything's very strong. But even the character, she's conflicted because she wants to live a normal, pressure-filled life as a regular girl, but she's got this superpower, and everyone expects her to do all this stuff and hold all this weight up and things like that and all of that. So yes, I get it, but she's a beast, right? This is an obvious problem. So if you see a movie like this with your kids, you can talk to them about how the fact that, obviously Luisa is not a real character. Women aren't built like that. Women aren't expected to do this kind of stuff and all of that. But here's the thing, though. Here's something that you don't get right off the bat unless you're paying attention to it. Here's the whole family, right? And everyone has magical powers. Everyone has magical powers. And we've got Luisa here. She's the oddball. She's the freak because she doesn't appear like a woman, even though she is a female character. All the other women do, though. And this is Isabella. She's a beautiful woman. She can make flowers anywhere. That's something that a girl would do. This is a proud grandmother. She does act a little male, a little masculine, but overall, we can all understand that sometimes there's proud grandmothers that are the matriarchs. We get it. This is another girl. This is a woman here. Her magical power is she feeds you and she heals you with her food. Again, a very womanly trait, that kind of thing. This one is... this one right here, she's very emotional. Her mood controls the weather. Again, another very female trait and all of that. And then we've got here, she's kind of a busybody because she has a superpower where she can hear anything, right? And all of those are female traits except for this one. And if you notice, somebody in the threads noticed, look, she doesn't have gigantic ears just because she can hear everything, right? But somehow she gets to be gigantic just because she's strong. And this is obviously a worldview issue. And you see this movie and you can talk about it. You could talk about it. And I don't know if Jen Wilkin even would talk about this, to be perfectly honest with you, because I'm not so sure that she actually believes the way I do about the way the world is. But this is inappropriate for a woman. And so when my sons and I watched this movie, we talked about all the issues, and it's like, that was just crazy, right? My sons are young, so we talked to them on a young level. This is crazy, and women aren't like that. They're like, yeah, that, and we're talking about it, right? And this movie, they played themselves, right? Because the movie is all about all this female-dominated family, and everyone's trying to fulfill these male roles, and it's a disaster. The family almost falls apart because of it, because the grandfather had died early on, and everything's a disaster because the grandfather's not there. They ended up playing themselves, but ultimately, they're trying to send a message here with this family. We get it. So when you're at home and you see this, what they're doing is they're trying to normalize a butch, gigantic woman being an actual woman. They're trying to normalize that. It's not normal. But I can tell my kids that that's not normal, and I know that they're watching this because we're at home together, right? But here's the thing. There is so much going on in public schools where it's not the lesson plan. Let's say you're watching a show about NASA and how they're going to launch another satellite up there. Definitely not with the balloon. They're definitely going to launch it into space, and it's just going to hang up there for some reason. It's just going to hang up there, orbiting the Earth and all of that kind of thing. It's definitely not on a balloon, though. And they're learning about how that's all done and stuff. So the lesson plan is about astrophysics, or maybe just regular physics. I don't really know what it's called. Let's say it's a lesson plan about rocket scientists. Your kids are in a wonderful school, and they're learning about rocket scientists, rocket science. And they're learning it from a trans person, a transvestite. It's a woman dressed like a man, or a man dressed like a woman. And maybe they're not even quite sure that it's a transvestite, but it's just kind of like they're a little, how you see a transvestite and like it's very obvious that it's a transvestite, but sometimes it's like because of the filters and stuff, like you're not 100% sure, so you don't want to say anything, but like you kind of know, that kind of thing. Your kids know even less than you do because they've been alive a lot less, and they could see that. And they see a trans person teaching them about these rockets. And then they come home, and you say, "Well, Johnny, what'd you learn about today, Johnny?" And they say, "Well, I learned about astrophysics and rocket science." And you're like so impressed. You're like, "Whoa!" And you talk about rocket science because the lesson wasn't about transsexuals. It was about rocket science. But all of a sudden, they're in a situation where that's just normal. Yeah, it's totally normal to have a dragonkin demon, worshiper teaching you about how the universe works. That's totally normal. That's a new authority now. You see, there's so many things that are like that if you're not, it's just normalizing it. Like there's so much going on here that you might not catch that they're normalizing this. They're trying to make this normal. This is a normal woman. All of them have magical power. So does Luisa. But Luisa's the only one that's gigantic and huge and butch. And they're trying to normalize it because it's just everyone's here is just normal. They just have magical powers. It's the stuff that you're not learning overtly, that they're not telling you about because they don't even know it's a thing to tell you about. That's the point. So when they get offered drugs, for the first time in the bathroom, which they most certainly will be offered drugs at some point, maybe they'll run home and tell you about it, Jen. But it's the stuff that they don't even know they need to tell you about. They don't even know because it's just the air that they've breathed since they were in kindergarten to now. They don't even know to tell you about it, so how can you have a conversation about it? Look, I'm not saying it's hopeless. If your kids are in public school, I'm not saying it's hopeless, obviously. But this perspective of, we've had lots of conversations. We know that the worldview comes from us. That's naive. That's naive. It's a naive perspective. Public school is not a safe place for your children in so many ways. In so many ways. And I'm not talking about gun violence, obviously. It's not wise to send your kids to public school. It is not appropriate for a Christian to send your kids to public school. It is not appropriate. You need to do whatever Jen Wilkin said, where she said you should do whatever you can to send them to public school. That is insane. That's insane. You should do whatever you possibly can to get your kids out of public school. That's the truth. From my space, that's the truth. You're not going to hear any aggression from that perspective on this side. I'm not saying aggression towards her. I'm just saying you're not going to hear any passion from their voice about this, because that's what Gospel Coalition is. It's a passionless sect that is dedicated, slavishly dedicated to giving their strength to women. Don't be like them. In any case, that's about it. I didn't mean to go 40 minutes, but I did. So that's how we go. That's how the cookie crumbles. God bless you. I hope you found this podcast helpful. God bless. Don't forget to tune in next week on Thursday for AD on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network.
Fuego, puro fuego es mi amor.